The twin sons of Tarsus 9, high and pale in the ashen sky, did little to break the cold that clung to the scorched wastelands. Their glare was harsh, their heat invasive. Yet the wind across the basalt plains remained eerily frigid, as though the planet wished to cling to the memory of some ancient, cooler era. At the heart of these badlands, at the edge of a dry canyon riddled with labyrinthine rock formations, lay a solitary figure struggling through the dust and the debris, an ex-military medic named Calen Ventaxis, carrying upon his shoulders one of the most important and mysterious individuals in the entire galaxy, the alien queen, Aelira. She had been betrayed, left for dead in an ambush that made little sense to Calen. He had watched the heavens on the first night after the attack, glimpsing the bright flares of atmospheric craft engaged in a systematic hunt. A clandestine conspiracy was unfolding, one that spanned multiple star systems and threatened the fragile peace tenuously holding the known worlds together. And now, wounded and barely able to walk, Aelira entrusted her very life to the man who had once served under the banner of a different empire, a soldier who had seen death and heartbreak on countless worlds, but had never quite encountered a being like her. For 5 days, they had traversed the Badlands, the rock-littered canyons, carved by ancient rivers long since vanished, became their hiding places. The basalt spires that jutted from the cracked ground were both their cover and their torment. Scorching sunlight by day, bitter cold by night. Tarsus 9 was a place of savage extremes. All the while, the pair felt the inevitable presence of pursuers creeping closer with each sunrise. And though the queen's identity remained shrouded in secrecy for those who had not personally encountered her, Calen knew the weight of the bounty placed upon her head. The galaxy's greatest powers moved against her, yet they were only the tip of a much darker plot. Aelira, regal in her bearing, even as she clung desperately to life, had tried to explain the scope of the betrayal. The Empire of Xandrius, once an ally of her people, had orchestrated a silent coup on her home planet. Had it not been for the few loyal souls within her retinue, she would have died outright during that first ambush in orbit. But they had spirited her away in a freighter, only for the ship to be shot down upon entry into Tarsus 9's atmosphere. Of the entire crew, only she and one other survived. Though the other's fate remained uncertain, Aelira had last seen them, lost in the blazing wreckage, before Calen discovered her. Now, holed up in the canyons and with meager supplies, the queen struggled to gather her thoughts and her strength, aware that their time was limited and that only her knowledge of a galaxy-shaking secret could save them. Calen, no stranger to dire circumstances, found himself in an unaccustomed position, caretaker to an alien queen with a bounty so large that opportunists across multiple star systems would kill to claim it. Yet his sense of duty, along with an unspoken empathy for those who needed protection, compelled him forward. A decorated medic who had once served in the harsh wars on Xavier Prime, Calen still carried the scars, both physical and emotional, of too many conflicts. He had no love left for empires. He had only an old vow to save lives wherever possible, no matter the cost. And so, with stoic determination, he continued each morning to gather Aelira in his arms or support her as she tried to walk, forging across the black dust plains toward an ancient set of ruins that beckoned on the horizon. There, rumors spoke of an abandoned outpost that might house supplies, or perhaps a way off this god-forsaken planet. The first of the 5 days had been the hardest. Aelira, half delirious from a plasma burn across her left hip, tried to hide her pain. Calen administered what little antiseptic and coagulant he had left in his battered field kit, murmuring assurances despite knowing that his meager resources were nothing compared to the advanced medical technologies her species would normally use. That night, the temperature plunged so drastically that frost formed on the edges of their steel canteens. Calen gathered what brush and dead vegetation he could find, lighting a small fire in the lee of a boulder. Aelira slept fitfully, speaking in hushed, anguished tones about betrayals and secrets that she dared not voice too loudly. Calen remained awake, listening to the wind and scanning the horizon for any flicker of movement. On the second day, they pressed on. The route forced them to cross the open expanse of a dried-up riverbed. There was little choice. Circling around would add days to their travel, and the endless dunes beyond the basalt ridges provided zero cover. Yet crossing that flat stretch made them vulnerable to the smallest scout drone or even the naked eye from a great distance. Still, a sense of urgency drove them forward. Aelira's wound needed better care, and the foreboding presence in the sky, dark silhouettes, occasionally cutting across the bright suns, warned Calen that time was against them. They were being hunted. By midday, they spotted tracks of a large vehicle, half buried in the dust. Undoubtedly, some advanced rover or light tank had passed here, likely carrying the assassins who sought the Queen's life. That second night, they hid in a cleft between sheer cliff walls. Calen scouted carefully before guiding Aelira inside, and in the darkness of that cramped shelter, they huddled together. Aelira, her voice soft and tinged with a regal accent, confessed a portion of the dire secret that had led her to this state. She possessed knowledge of a new element discovered in the hearts of her empire's crystal mines, an element so potent that it might power advanced weaponry beyond imagination, or offer an energy source that could shift the balance of power across the galaxy. The Xandrian Empire, once her ally, had learned of it and had manipulated her courts to place her in a vulnerable position. Now, the assassination team scoured Tarsus 9 to ensure she did not survive long enough to reveal the truth. She had to be silenced, lest the entire galaxy descend into chaos. Calen listened, grim-faced, his own mind reeling at what such an element might mean. His instincts told him that if word spread of its existence, empires far and wide would scramble to seize or destroy entire planets for a share of such power. The third day dawned with Aelira's condition slightly improved. The combination of Calen's first aid and her own race's resiliency allowed her to stand, albeit weakly. She insisted on walking for part of the day, leaning on Calen's shoulder, determined not to slow their progress. The cliffs around them grew more erratic, twisting in weather-sculpted forms that cast surreal shadows. It was there, amid the half-light of the canyon labyrinth, that they encountered their first direct threat. A silent glint overhead caught Calen's eye. He raised his battered multi-scope, and by the faint reflection of sunlight, confirmed the presence of a small aerial drone. Instantly, his heart hammered if the drone spotted them and relayed their location. The assassins would converge within hours. Aelira, half dizzy and leaning on a basalt outcrop, winced as Calen guided her behind a rock. He scanned the sky. The drone hovered, uncertain or perhaps damaged by the ambient conditions. He seized the moment, lining up the sights of his sidearm, a modified neural disruptor pistol with only a single good energy cell left. He squeezed the trigger. The whisper snap of the disruptor sounded, faint as a breath of wind, and a spark erupted high above. The drone spun out of control, trailing a sputter of black smoke, before crashing on the far side of the canyon. Hoping that the downed drone's transmissions had been cut off in time, Calen steeled himself, ushering Aelira to move faster, to press on before reinforcements arrived. They made camp in a narrower section of the canyon that night. Aelira, though weak, managed to speak more of the secret. It was not merely the existence of the element, she explained, but also the knowledge of how it could be used responsibly, to usher in a new era of peace, or to bring about unimaginable destruction. In the wrong hands, entire star systems could be enslaved or obliterated. She trembled at the thought, and Calen, though he had witnessed planetary invasions before, had never contemplated such destructive potential. With a pang, he realized that his vow to preserve life would be tested far beyond anything he had faced in his service days. On the fourth day, the tension grew. Morning light revealed fresh tracks, not far from their makeshift campsite human footprints, and the imprint of heavier boots that could belong to cybernetically augmented soldiers. Calen and Aelira hurried onward, aware that a direct confrontation with well-armed hunters in her condition would be a swift end for both of them. Around midday, the air changed. becoming hotter and drier, and the basalt pillars gave way to broader plains. Calen consulted a battered navigation device he had salvaged from a wreck. According to the partial data, they were nearing the rumored outpost, a structure from the planet's past, built by explorers or colonists centuries ago. If it still stood, if it still had supplies or a functional ship, it could be their one chance at survival. Yet Tarsus 9 did not give up its secrets so easily. A swirling dust storm rose from the far horizon, an amber cloud bearing down on them with the fury of an uncaged beast. Visibility plummeted, and a biting wind howled across the plains. They clung to each other, forging ahead by instinct. Every step a battle against the gritty blast. Aelira coughed, the dust scraping her already wounded side, and Calen guided her with a hand on her elbow, searching desperately for any sign of shelter. By dusk, the storm's fury lessened enough that they could see a jagged outline on the horizon, a shape that appeared too rigid, too smooth, to be a natural rock formation. The outpost. Perhaps salvation lay just beyond their line of sight. They pressed on, the scouring wind raking their clothes. Weakness knotted in Calen's limbs, but he refused to stop. He supported Aelira with one arm and held his free hand to shield his eyes from the relentless dust. Finally, they arrived at the perimeter of the ancient structure. Dust, caked walls of metal and plasteel, battered by centuries of storms, rusting in some parts, buckled in others. A set of enormous sliding doors had once sealed the entrance, but the storm's relentless onslaught had forced them partly ajar. With a grunt of effort, Calen wedged his shoulder against the gap, creating just enough space for them to slip inside. Beyond the threshold lay a cavernous interior, dimly lit by vents and cracks in the roof, through which the swirling dust cast eerie patterns. They ventured deeper, following corridors lined with broken consoles and tarnished signage. A cluster of supply crates, some pried open long ago, hinted that previous scavengers had passed through. But a handful of unopened containers remained, their exteriors labeled in faded stenciling from a long-forgotten expedition. Calen's heart lifted. Even a fraction of what might lie inside could be enough for them to replenish their meager supplies. They settled in what appeared to be a control room for the night, with trembling hands. Calen pried open a crate to find ration packs dehydrated but still sealed. He tested one, discovering it was barely edible, though at that point anything that gave them energy was a blessing. Aelira, leaning heavily against a crate, managed a small smile of gratitude. Seeing her fight so valiantly to retain her composure stirred something deep within. Calen, a protective instinct he had not felt since his days in the medical corps, when the plight of helpless civilians once moved him to acts of reckless heroism. That night, as the wind raged outside, Aelira spoke in hushed detail about the calamity that had befallen her kingdom. She was not merely a queen in the ceremonial sense. Her role was intimately tied to the spiritual and economic foundations of her people's entire planetary network. Her authority, and her bond with the ancient crystals that grew on her homeworld, positioned her as both a political and symbolic figure. The crystals, resonant with energies far older than any empire, had now been revealed to contain unimaginable power when refined a certain way. Instead of forging an honest alliance, the Xandrian Empire had conspired with internal traitors to stage a coup. Their assassins had spared no expense, ensuring that none of Aelira's loyal guardians could ever come to her rescue. Only a desperate flight to Tarsus 9 had bought her a chance to survive, a chance that now rested almost entirely in Calen's hands. He listened, his gaze fixed upon her regal features in the dim light. A wave of emotion swept through him as she finished, and he realized that the burden she carried was monumental. Yet she bore it with a quiet dignity that reminded him of ancient queens from humanity's own mythic past. He gave her what reassurance he could. Tomorrow, he vowed, they would search the outpost for a means of contacting off-world, or better yet, a small craft with partial flight capability. They needed to escape Tarsus 9, to get her somewhere safe. Perhaps then she could reveal the truth to other galactic factions who might help. Calen felt an unsteady hope flicker within him. even as exhaustion threatened to drag him under. By the dawn of the fifth day, the dust storm had subsided, leaving the outpost half buried in dunes. Calen rose early, scouring the corridors for anything of value. One chamber held an array of archaic power cells, some of which might still hold a residual charge. Another contained fragments of an old planetary rover, its cabin smashed, but its engine block possibly salvageable. As Calen explored deeper into the structure, he discovered a sealed hatchway. After an hour of prying with a crowbar and hacking at the rusted mechanism, he forced it open, revealing a hidden sublevel. A wave of stagnant air struck him. The gloom beyond the threshold was almost suffocating, but by the faint glow of a flashlight salvaged from one of the crates, he glimpsed the shape of a small craft resting in the vault, like space. It was a scout ship, probably left behind by the outpost's original inhabitants, featuring folded wings and an elongated cockpit. Though ancient, it might still function with enough patchwork repairs and the right power cells. His heart surged with optimism. If they could get it airborne, even for a few hours, they might reach a safer quadrant of Tarsus 9, where rescue signals could be sent, or perhaps they could even climb to orbit. He rushed back to Aelira, who was still resting in the control room, carefully tending her wound using the last of Calen's bandages. He explained what he had found, and she gazed at him in astonishment, the faint glimmer in her eyes revealing renewed hope. Together, they descended into the sublevel. Though her steps were slow, Aelira did her best to help. With practiced efficiency, Calen checked each system, hooking up old cables to the handful of power cells they had found. Sparks flew. He cursed under his breath. The main capacitor array was cracked, but perhaps with some improvisation, they could bypass it. Hours passed in frantic, delicate work. Now and then, he asked Aelira to hold a light steady or pass a tool. Outside, the day advanced, and the haunting memory of the drones and the knowledge of the assassins pressed upon them like a tightening noose. Late that afternoon, Calen finally tried powering up the scout ship. A series of flickers illuminated the craft's interior console. An engine hum stuttered to life. The entire vessel shook violently for a moment, but then stabilized, indicating a tenuous readiness. Sweating and exhausted, Calen let himself exhale. Aelira, too, wore a subdued smile of relief. They were close to escape. Yet they knew the final test would be to exit the sublevel, open the outpost doors, and see if the vessel could actually lift off in open air. As they returned to the main corridor, Calen's eyes swept across the door to the outside. His mind drifted to the possibility that any watchers might have already discovered the outpost. Surely the crashed drone would have sent some partial transmission, if not a complete one. Indeed, as they neared the outpost's main entrance, they froze at the sight of a subtle shimmer in the dusty gloom. A group of figures, their silhouettes outlined by the dusty beams of the Tarsus 9 suns, stood just outside the broken entrance. Calen counted at least 5, possibly more, armed with rifles and wearing the insignia of the dreaded Sindrath Kill Squad's mercenaries, often employed by powerful factions to eliminate high-value targets. Heart pounding, Calen gestured for Aelira to retreat silently. They slipped behind a stack of crates, their minds racing. The mercenaries were clearly scanning the outpost, searching for any sign of the Queen. By the hushed voices echoing off the metal walls, Calen judged they would not hesitate to shoot first and ask questions later. They had to reach the sublevel again. The scout ship was their only chance. But how to slip past an entire kill squad? Still crouched behind the crates, Calen checked his sidearm. 1 charge left, maybe 2 if he reduced the disruptor's intensity. Hardly enough to engage multiple heavily armed mercenaries. He glanced at Aelira, whose complexion was ashen from pain and fatigue, but whose eyes burned with a resolute light. She whispered that she might be able to distract them. Her species possessed certain psychoacoustic abilities tied to the resonance of the crystals. If she could channel even a small echo of that power, she might cloud their senses for a few crucial seconds. Calen was torn between hope and anxiety. He knew how precarious her condition was, but time was running out. and soon the mercenaries would spread throughout the outpost, ensuring there was no place left to hide. Whispering a quick plan, they readied themselves. Aelira shut her eyes, focusing. A faint hum emerged from her throat, resonating at a pitch that made the metal walls quiver. Calen had never heard anything like it, an unearthly harmony that caused the hair on his arms to stand on end. Outside, the mercenaries' voices faltered. Confusion spread among them as the resonance rippled through the corridors, causing them to stagger momentarily, grappling at helmets or pressing hands to their ears. That was the moment Calen needed. With swift steps, he guided Aelira along the edge of the main corridor, keeping behind broken machinery, until they slipped into a side passage that led back to the sublevel hatch. More than once, the mercenaries nearly saw them, but Aelira's droning hum kept them disoriented, glancing about in bewilderment. Finally, just as the humming in her throat wavered and died, Aelira trembling from the strain, Calen ushered her through the hatch. He pulled it shut behind them and wedged a damaged metal beam in place of the broken lock, hoping to delay pursuit. They hurried to the scout ship. Calen buckled a pail, sweating Aelira into the co-pilot's seat, then slipped into the pilot's seat himself, rapidly running through the pre-flight checks. He initiated the engines. The old craft coughed and groaned, but the power readings lit up. Above them, the mercenaries apparently realized where the fugitives had gone. Heavy boots thundered overhead. Calen's knuckles whitened on the control yoke. He activated the vertical thrusters. The scout ship began to rise slowly, with a hiss of decompression. The overhead doors, ancient hydraulic systems, battered by centuries, started to creak open, unleashing a brilliant flood of dusty light into the sublevel. The craft inched upward, trembling, passing through the narrow gap of the now parted roof. But the mercenaries were fast. As soon as the scout ship cleared the roof, a volley of energy blasts lanced upward, searing the hull. Alarms blared in the cockpit. Calen wrestled with the controls, pushing the thrusters to their limit. The ship wobbled, nearly tipping sideways, but then stabilized, rising higher. Outside the viewport, he glimpsed the squat, armored figures below, sending bursts of plasma sizzling through the air. At any moment, one well-aimed shot could doom them. Gritting his teeth, Calen poured what power remained into the forward engines. The scout ship lurched ahead, accelerating into the open skies. A battered cheer escaped his lips. They had made it into the air, but Tarsus 9 was not done testing them. Over the horizon, more silhouettes soared interceptor ships, sleek and far more advanced than the old scout craft. Their black hulls gleamed with lethal intent. Calen gulped. This old vessel could never outrun or outmaneuver modern interceptors. He needed a plan, and fast. The navigation console displayed only partial data. The starport, built generations ago, was on the opposite side of the planet. Even if it still functioned, reaching it would be nearly impossible before the interceptors closed in. Aelira stirred from her near-faint condition, gaze sharpening at the sight of the interceptors. In a trembling voice, she directed Calen to a range of jagged mountains not far from the outpost. According to her knowledge of Tarsus 99's older cartographical data, there might be canyons where they could attempt to lose their pursuers, or at least force a standoff in narrower confines. With little choice, Calen angled the scout ship toward those distant ridges, the interceptors looming behind them in methodical pursuit. They flew low over the plain, the scout ship rattling as dust and debris whipped across the hull. Alarms persisted. Calen did his best to ignore them, focusing on weaving a meandering path that might buy them precious seconds. Up ahead, the mountains rose in a series of dramatic spires, ridges, and valleys. He dipped the scout ship below the crest line, hugging the terrain. The interceptors followed, overshadowing the sun for a moment. Energy blasts streaked the sky. Rocks exploded near the craft's wingtips, showering them in shards of basalt. Yet the narrow passages worked in their favor. The larger, heavier interceptors could not easily maneuver within the tight canyon corridors. Still, the chase was relentless. Calen felt the ship's engine sputter dangerously more than once. In the co-pilot seat, Aelira fought to remain conscious, her left side throbbing with renewed pain. She managed to call out directions, guiding them through an intricate weave of canyons and outcroppings, each turn more daring than the last. One intercepting craft, perhaps pressing too hard, clipped a rock spire and crashed in a fiery blast. However, that still left at least two more on their tail. Finally, with hardly any fuel left in the battered scout ship, Calen emerged into a broader canyon basin dotted with crumbling ruins. The second interceptor swooped overhead, preparing a final shot. Tension twisted in Calen's chest. This was it, one last gamble. He pulled back on the throttle, letting the scout ship dip dangerously. The interceptor pilot, presumably confident, dived in for the kill. At the final moment, Calen slammed the thrust to full, forcing the scout ship to rocket up and away. The interceptor overshot, its blast scouring the canyon floor. In that split second, the pilot tried to pull up, but Calen's ship had soared higher, leaving the heavier craft below. That gave them just enough of an advantage to slip through a gap in the ridge, out of line of sight. But the third interceptor was waiting. With chilling precision, it loomed overhead. Blocking their escape route, Calen gasped, searching for any path around it. The situation was grim. The old scout ship's engines were near meltdown. The canyon walls hemmed them in. A dogfight here was suicide. The interceptor unleashed a volley of plasma. Calen yanked the controls, pivoting the ship behind a rocky outcrop. The blasts hammered down, close enough to rock the scout ship and scorch the underside. Another direct hit, and they would be done for. Then, something unexpected happened. A second volley. But this time, it was not aimed at them. Instead, the interceptor reeled sideways, energy blasts raking its hull from somewhere in the distance. Both Calen and Aelira watched in astonishment as the black craft spiraled away, trailing smoke far off. Beyond the ridgeline, an older cargo freighter soared into view, battered but armed with a pair of rail cannons. Calen recognized the emblem on its hull, one of the mercantile clans that occasionally sided with outcasts and rebels. Perhaps these new arrivals had no love for the Xandrian conspirators, or maybe they had heard rumors of the bounty and wanted to intervene in their own manner. Regardless, the interceptor, caught off guard, veered to retreat, leaving the exhausted scout ship to hover shakily above the canyon basin. The cargo freighter descended, and a series of signals flashed across Calen's console. He hesitated, uncertain, but Aelira nodded that they should respond. This was possibly the only friendly contact they could hope for. Summoning the last reserves of engine power, Calen guided the scout ship to land on a level stretch of rock near the ruins. The cargo freighter settled beside them, hatch opening. Out stepped a group of armed figures in mismatched gear, cautious but not overtly hostile. Their leader, a tall woman with a scarred brow, raised a hand in greeting. She introduced herself as Captain Seraphine Dar, captain of the Starbreaker's Pride. They had picked up faint transmissions from the outpost and recognized the clandestine signals of the kill squad. Recognizing it as an opportunity to disrupt one of Xandria's covert operations and potentially gain new allies, Seraphine had intervened. Now, face to face with the wounded alien queen, she seemed taken aback. Whatever political complexities existed across the galaxy, Aelira's regal bearing and evident injuries sparked compassion. Seraphine offered them safe passage off Tarsus 9. Her crew, though small, could smuggle them to a neutral station in a distant sector, beyond the immediate reach of the conspirators. There, perhaps, Aelira could find real medical care and muster allies. Calen glanced at Aelira, who nodded weakly. The queen had withstood 5 days of pure ordeals, scorched deserts, lethal assassins, and a dogfight in the battered remains of an ancient scout ship. Now, at last, a slender thread of hope beckoned. With no alternative in sight, they accepted Captain Seraphine's offer. Thus began the next phase of their journey, escaping Tarsus 9. Within an hour, the cargo freighter soared into the planet's upper atmosphere. navigating swirling clouds of dust and radiation pockets from Tarsus 99's volatile magnetosphere. Calen sat by Aelira's side in the makeshift infirmary. The old vessel's medical bay no more than a repurposed cargo hold lined with cots. Here, at least, they had a better chance of tending to the Queen's wound. Captain Seraphine herself assisted, rummaging through her supplies for advanced medical patches. While they worked, Aelira confided more details about the traitors who had orchestrated her downfall, naming them, describing the intricate web of alliances that had once bound her world to Xandria. Seraphine listened, her expression grim. She claimed to have encountered Xandrian treachery before. Indeed, the reason she commanded an independent mercantile ship was because her own home colony had suffered under Xandrian exploitation. The chance to help expose their newest atrocity resonated deeply with her. 2 days later, after transiting through the star system's outer edges to avoid any lingering blockade, the Starbreaker's Pride arrived at a remote station in neutral space. The station was a labyrinth of metal corridors and cargo docks, populated by a mix of traders, refugees, and renegades. Here, Aelira found a private medical facility run by an old physician who owed Captain Seraphine a favor. Under the doctor's care, the Queen finally received a measure of healing that Calen's field kits could never provide. The advanced therapies stimulated her cells' natural regeneration, repairing the worst of the plasma damage. Within a week, she could walk unassisted, though she still bore the scar of that near-fatal wound. During that time, Calen conferred with Seraphine and her crew, discussing how best to expose the truth about Xandria's plot. They spoke in hushed voices around the ship's central table, the overhead lights flickering with the station's intermittent power surges. A single broadcast from Aelira, revealing her survival and unveiling the secrets behind Xandria's conspiracy, could rouse entire star systems to rally to her side. Yet it would also paint a massive target on them all. The station was no fortress. Mercenary squads and intelligence agents frequented such ports, always fishing for bounties. If rumors spread that the alien queen was here, chaos would erupt. Aelira, though grateful for the rescue, felt the weight of responsibility pressing upon her. She could not hide forever. Her people, scattered and leaderless, needed her to reclaim her rightful throne. Moreover, the galaxy at large needed to understand the danger of the new element, lest it spark a war of unimaginable proportions. Calen, seeing her determination, pledged to stand by her side. They had crossed an entire desert, risked death under scorching suns, and faced professional killers. Whatever lay ahead, he would not abandon her. Captain Seraphine, intrigued by the potential for toppling Xandria's sinister expansion, offered an alternative. She had contacts in a confederation known to oppose Xandria. If they could secure a meeting with key figures in that confederation, they might build a coalition strong enough to protect Aelira and stand against the Empire. But first, they needed to leave the station discreetly. Soon, too many eyes would notice the presence of a mysterious alien who seldom ventured from the private medical facility. Thus, under the cover of night, or the closest equivalent in the station's circadian lighting, they hatched a plan. The Starbreaker's Pride would feign a run for cargo shipments, drawing attention from suspicious parties. Meanwhile, Aelira Calen and 1 or 2 loyal crew members would slip away in a smaller transport craft borrowed from a smuggler contact. Once clear of the station, they would rendezvous at a predetermined set of coordinates in deep space, far from the regular trade routes. On the appointed day, the plan unfolded with practiced stealth. Seraphine guided her freighter from its docking bay, intentionally broadcasting a flight plan that seemed routine, yet in truth was meant to lure away any potential spies. Calen supported Aelira as they made their way to an auxiliary hangar, wearing inconspicuous cloaks that concealed her regal features and avoided prying eyes. The smuggler, a wiry, sharp-eyed man with a sly grin, waited by the battered hull of his old transport. He nodded, acknowledging Captain Seraphine's favor. For the right price, he would fly them anywhere. The galaxy ran on secrets and credits. After all, They boarded the cramped vessel and secured themselves in threadbare seats. The smuggler launched from the station, weaving through the traffic lanes and registering a false cargo manifest with the port authority. Within an hour, they were in open space, heading away from the star lanes that might carry the watchful presence of Xandrian patrols. A sense of tenuous relief filled the cabin as the station dwindled into a distant point of light. Yet each of them knew the hardest part still lay ahead. During the quiet of the voyage, Calen found himself reflecting on the strange twists of fate that had led him here from a solitary wanderer on Tarsus 9 to a companion and protector of an alien queen in mortal danger. He felt gratitude that Aelira lived, and a renewed sense of purpose in fighting for a cause larger than himself. Yet he also felt the weight of all that could be lost if they failed. The galaxy's political chessboard was vast, with powerful pieces arrayed against them. The conspirators in Xandria would not rest until Aelira was silenced for good. They jumped to faster than light speeds, the vessel's drives whining with the strain of old components. Time became a blur, each hour marked by the hum of the engines and the subdued glow of control panels. Now and then, Aelira would rest, her eyes drifting closed in exhaustion. Calen took it upon himself to keep watch, ensuring the smuggler stayed true to his word. As for the smuggler, he mostly kept to himself, occasionally casting curious glances at the cloaked figure in the corner, who radiated an aura of quiet nobility. Finally, they approached the rendezvous coordinates, a lonely region of space devoid of major celestial bodies, the perfect place for clandestine meetings. The faint outlines of the Starbreaker's Pride materialized on sensors. They docked with Seraphine's freighter, transferring to the relative comfort of her more spacious compartments. The tension in the air lifted slightly, replaced by a subdued optimism. Now that they were reunited, the next step was to secure an audience with the Confederation. That Confederation's name was the Tri-World Alliance, a triad of planetary governments that had resisted Xandria's encroachments in the past. If Aelira could convince them of the truth, then perhaps a broader alliance would form an alliance strong enough to threaten the conspirators with exposure and retaliation. However, contacting the Tri-World Alliance was not trivial. They were as suspicious of infiltration as they were of Xandria's aggression. Seraphine did, however, have a tenuous inroad. One of her crew, an older man named Calen, claimed to have an estranged daughter serving as an aide to a key ambassador in the Alliance's diplomatic corps. If Calen could leverage that relationship, they might gain a hearing. So they set course for the Tri-World Alliance's central hub, a planet named Aelira, its orbit ringed by a fortress-like station. Aelira was famed for its miles of farmland, shining seas, and robust planetary defense grid. Here, the illusions of neutrality vanished. Everyone knew that the Tri-World Alliance held firm against any incursion. Unauthorized craft were turned away or shot down without hesitation. The Starbreaker's Pride approached carefully, broadcasting identification codes that Captain Seraphine had obtained through old contacts. Hours stretched as they awaited clearance. Tension mounted in each of them. Then, that last, came the response. Permission to land at a designated spaceport. Upon disembarking on Aelira's surface, Aelira wore a hooded cloak once more, with Calen at her side. Calen guided them through the port's labyrinthine customs area, managing the usual bureaucratic nonsense with stoic patience. Eventually, they reached an administrative district where Calen's daughter, an earnest, sharp-minded official named Ceres, awaited them. Though father and daughter had parted on poor terms decades earlier, the old man's sincerity in reuniting under such dire circumstances moved her. She eyed Aelira with curiosity, clearly sensing that something monumental was at stake, and after a brief exchange of heartfelt words with her father, she agreed to attempt arranging a private audience with Ambassador Keldrain, one of the Tri-World Alliance's most influential figures. No one expected it to be easy. Protocol demanded thorough vetting, ensuring that no Xandrian spies or saboteurs slipped in. Over the course of several tense days, Aelira and Calen remained in quiet quarters provided by Ceres, carefully guarded. A rotating group of Alliance security officers verified their backgrounds, scanning for potential threats. Aelira, though weary of the scrutiny, understood the necessity. If the Tri-World Alliance was to trust her enough to act, they had to be certain of her identity and her intentions. At last, the day of the audience arrived. The corridor leading to Ambassador Keldrain's office was lined with holographic displays depicting scenes of the three worlds that formed the Alliance: Elisara's pastoral vistas, Chronai's intricate floating cities, and Zendra's harsh desert terrain, where resourceful colonists made their living in massive subterranean complexes. Each world had a stake in thwarting Xandria's expansion. For the moment, however, it all hinged on whether this single ambassador would deem Aelira's revelations credible. They entered a chamber furnished with austere elegance. Ambassador Keldrain, a silver-haired man clad in the traditional garments of Elisara, stood waiting behind a polished table. His aides hovered nearby, datapads in hand. Ceres quietly introduced them. Aelira drew back her hood, revealing her regal features and the faint scar that marked her ordeal. A hush fell over the room. At a gesture from Keldrain, everyone took their seats. Calen stood protectively behind Aelira, scanning the space for any sign of hostility. With careful deliberation, Aelira laid bare her story, starting with the discovery of the potent element hidden in her people's crystals. The alliance with Xandria that turned sour, the betrayal on her homeworld, and the near-fatal ambush that cast her onto Tarsus 9, where she was forced to flee with nothing but the will to survive. She described, too, the unstoppable devastation that could be unleashed if the conspirators refined and weaponized this newly discovered resource. The entire galaxy would be at the mercy of the Empire's cruelty. The ambassador listened intently, interjecting with the occasional probing question. His stern gaze flickered with concern when Aelira recounted the death squads, the scorched deserts, the battered outpost, and finally, the desperate flight from Tarsus 9. When she finished, the silence was long. The ambassador's aides whispered among themselves, their expressions grave. At length, Keldrain spoke, his voice resonating with a certain wary compassion. He told them that the Alliance had received troubling rumors of a renewed Xandrian push, but no concrete evidence. And while Aelira's story was compelling, the Alliance needed more than testimony. They required irrefutable proof of Xandria's duplicity, something that could rally other systems. Without that, many would dismiss the revelations as propaganda. Aelira sat straighter, determination shining in her eyes. She revealed that she carried within her a living genetic link to the crystals, a bio-encoded key that could interface with the crystal cores from her homeworld. This key held the data of her planet's most guarded records, including scans of the new element and the warnings of how it might be weaponized. However, extracting that data required specialized facilities that only existed on her home planet or in similarly advanced research stations. If the Tri-World Alliance was willing to support an expedition, they could obtain the proof they sought. Keldrain exhaled slowly, aware that such an expedition would be no small risk. The conspirators would doubtless meet them with lethal force if they attempted to land on her home planet. Still, if the threat was as dire as Aelira claimed, the cost of inaction could be far greater. Finally, in measured tones, the ambassador offered a guarded acceptance. He would present Aelira's case to the Tri-World Council, urging them to form a small expeditionary force, enough to infiltrate her homeworld quietly without igniting a full-scale war. They would attempt to gather the evidence needed to sway the rest of the galaxy. Aelira thanked him, her voice quavering with relief and gratitude. Calen placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. In the days that followed, the Tri-World Council debated the matter behind closed doors. Tensions flared, with certain factions fearing that open confrontation with Xandria would drag the Alliance into a costly conflict. Others argued that ignoring the threat would be a grave mistake. Ceres, using her position as an aide, spoke passionately in Aelira's favor, as did several key individuals who had encountered Xandrian treachery firsthand. At last, a narrow majority, agreed to a covert mission. A small contingent of Alliance specialists would accompany Aelira, guided by Calen and the loyal crew of the Starbreaker's Pride, back to her homeworld. Their objective: retrieve conclusive evidence of the element's existence, Xandria's role in the coup, and any data proving the magnitude of the threat. Thus, the stage was set for the final gambit. The expedition launched under the guise of a routine patrol, merging with standard cargo traffic to avoid detection. They traveled through hyperspace, each day bringing them nearer the seat of the empire that had tried to kill their queen. Aelira spent the journey in preparation, using what mental exercises she could to harness her race's crystal resonance ability, for she knew it might be needed again. Calen kept watch, ensuring her health remained stable, continuing to administer the advanced medicine the Alliance had provided. Soon, they emerged from hyperspace at the edge of her home system, a cluster of planets orbiting a brilliant blue sun. Space lanes were heavily patrolled by Xandrian ships, so the expedition used stealth protocols, slipping past sensor nets by navigating lesser-known routes through the outer asteroid belt. The nights aboard the Starbreaker's Pride pulsed with quiet anticipation. Finally, the day came to descend onto the Queen's homeworld. They touched down in a remote region known for its mountainous terrain, far from the capital city that lay under Xandrian occupation. A hidden base, once used by Aelira's loyal guardians, nestled in the lee of a towering peak. Though dusty from disuse, it still held some relics of the advanced technology that her people had once openly practiced. A few of the loyalists, scattered refugees who had escaped the purge, still kept vigil there. When Aelira appeared among them, a hush of awe and sudden tears greeted her, for they had believed her long dead. Their queen, battered but unbroken, had returned at last. Among these loyalists was a scientist named Dr. Rithan, who possessed the expertise to extract the data locked within Aelira's bio-encoded key. With trembling excitement, he led her to the sealed lab beneath the base. Calen and the Tri-World specialists watched as Dr. Rithan activated a series of crystalline interfaces that glowed with soft, pulsing light. Aelira placed her hand upon the central crystal. A surge of bioluminescence coursed through the lab, weaving shimmering patterns in the air. Slowly, data coalesced as holographic readouts, displaying the molecular structure of the newly discovered element. Its potential energies were off the charts, enough to power entire sectors or devastate them in a heartbeat. The readouts also contained logs of transmissions between Xandria's top brass and traitors in Aelira's court. The conspirators' vile intentions were spelled out plainly, referencing how they would isolate the Queen, orchestrate her accidental death, and seize control of the planet's crystal mines. Scrawled across the margins were notations about how best to suppress any knowledge of the element's more dangerous properties. Dr. Rithan, mouth set in grim determination, compiled the data into a secure format. At last, they had the proof. But their work did not go unnoticed, even as they prepared to transmit the evidence to the Tri-World Alliance. Xandrian patrols, likely tipped off by local informants, descended upon the region. Alarm klaxons blared within the base. Calen and the Alliance soldiers scrambled to fortify the entrances. Aelira, bracing herself against the residual ache in her side, resolved that this would be the moment they stood firm. They had the evidence needed to topple the conspiracy. Yet the price of that victory might be paid in blood if the conspirators refused to yield. Battle erupted in the mountain pass. Xandrian troopers, clad in dark armor, advanced with mechanized walkers. The Tri-World specialists, though fewer in number, fought with disciplined fury. Laser fire streaked the sky. The once tranquil ridges echoed with the thunder of explosives. Within the base, Dr. Rithan initiated a secure quantum transmission, beaming the data to the Tri-World Alliance and to multiple independent networks, ensuring that no single point of failure could silence the truth. Calen fought side by side with the Loyalists. His medic's heart turned soldier once more. He took aim with the disruptor rifle he had been issued, felling Xandrian troopers that sought to breach the lab. Each shot reminded him of old battles, old regrets, But here, at least, he was fighting for a cause that might end a cycle of oppression. Aelira, struggling to remain upright, summoned her resonant powers again. The hum in her throat built into a crescendo that shook the very stones, causing the Xandrian walkers to falter as their pilots clutched at their helmets. She concentrated, channeling the synergy between her own bio-encoded ki and the planet's crystalline underpinnings, generating a wave of dissonance that shorted out sensors and scrambled targeting systems. It was a desperate gamble. Each use of this power took a toll on her body, and faint lines of strain appeared along her temples. Yet the effect was enough to tilt the fight in their favor. Xandrian forces, blinded and disoriented, began to withdraw, realizing that the queen they had sworn to kill was not so helpless after all. As they fell back, Tri-World reinforcements emerged from newly arrived dropships on the far slope, driving the invaders into a chaotic retreat. Within a few short hours, the mountain pass was clear, though at the cost of injuries and the smoldering wreckage of mechs and barricades. Calen rushed to tend the wounded. Among the Tri-World soldiers, no lives had been lost in unexpected mercy. They had triumphed against the immediate threat. During that time, Dr. Rithen confirmed that the transmissions had been sent successfully. The entire galaxy would soon know the truth about the element, about Xandria's treachery, and about the rightful queen who had survived the Empire's attempts to silence her. A wave of relief washed over Aelira. She sank to her knees on the battered ground, tears in her eyes. Calen knelt beside her, gently embracing her as the surging emotions of victory and sorrow flooded through both of them. For so long, they had been hunted, battered by storms, and shot at by merciless assassins. Now, they had not only survived, they had revealed a truth that could reshape the fate of countless worlds. In the days that followed, the revelations spread like wildfire. Multiple star systems, previously fearful of Xandria's might, began to rally behind the Tri-World Alliance. Emboldened by the Queen's survival and the staggering evidence of the Empire's betrayal, they formed a coalition. Diplomatic channels buzzed with calls for sanctions against Xandria, demands for justice, and the immediate release of the Queen's homeworld from occupation. Facing universal condemnation and the threat of a broad interstellar conflict, the Xandrian Empire's leadership teetered. The conspirators who had plotted Aelira's downfall were arrested or forced into hiding as internal factions scrambled to distance themselves from the fiasco. Xandria's new ruling council hastily dispatched envoys, seeking an armistice. Amid this political upheaval, Aelira was formally restored as queen of her world, though many challenges remained: rebuilding her palace, reuniting her scattered people, and ensuring that the new element's use was strictly governed. She faced the future with renewed resolve. By her side stood Calen, who had turned from a simple wanderer into a hero in the eyes of her people. The Tri-World Alliance pledged to stand as protectors of the planet, while new treaties were hammered out, preventing Xandria from ever again seizing the crystals or threatening the Queen's domain. At a ceremonial gathering in the newly liberated capital city, with thousands of her subjects cheering in the streets, Aelira honored Calen before the entire assembly. She spoke of his bravery in carrying her across the harsh deserts, his unwavering loyalty in the face of assassins, and his devotion to saving life even when the odds were stacked against them. She named him a guardian of the Crystal Crown, a title reserved for the highest champions of her people, a distinction no human had ever before received. Calen, humbled and somewhat overwhelmed by the adoration of a world so different from his own, bowed respectfully, then turned to Aelira. In his eyes shone the quiet gratitude of a man who had found renewed purpose in championing something greater than himself. That evening, amid the glow of lanterns strung throughout the city's crystalline spires, the people celebrated. Music drifted through the air, a kaleidoscope of cultural traditions melding in joyous harmony. Captain Seraphine and her crew joined in the festivities, swapping war stories with the Tri-World soldiers who had fought beside them. The loyalists who had hidden in the mountains came down to reunite with friends and family. And high above, in the starry sky, the galaxy seemed to hold its breath. poised on the edge of a brighter future. Aelira stood upon a balcony overlooking the festivities, the same vantage once occupied by traitors who had doomed her. Now, she saw hope reflected in every light below. The conspirators were defeated, and with the newly formed coalition determined to keep the element out of dangerous hands, perhaps the horrors she had feared would never come to pass. She turned to Calen, her voice gentle as she thanked him once more, not just for saving her life, but for reminding her what it meant to trust someone beyond all politics, beyond all fear. And so the story ended not in tragedy, but in the promise of peace. The desert planet Tarsis 9 remained a memory of trial and tribulation, a place of dust storms, scorching suns, and narrow escapes. Yet it was also the place where a wounded queen found the courage to persist, and where a single ex-military medic discovered that his old vows to protect life could shape the destiny of an entire galaxy. In time, the galaxy would heal from the scars left by the conspiracy, forging new alliances in the wake of this crisis. And the queen, who once had a bounty on her head, the most wanted being in the galaxy, stood hand in hand with the man who had become her only hope, proof that, even in the darkest times, compassion, courage, and the promise of a better tomorrow could triumph over treachery, fear, and despair.